As I've said, President Trump's comments at today's press conference drew swift condemnation from many members of his own party, including never-Trumper Tennessee Senator Bob Corker.
Everyone who's dealt with Putin understands fully that the best way to deal with him is through strength. And I just felt like the president's comments made us look as a nation more like a pushover.
Corker was joined in slamming the president by Arizona Senator John McCain, who issued a statement saying no prior president has ever abased himself more abjectly before a tyrant. But Kentucky Senator Rand Paul says everyone needs to calm down because there's an upside to opening a dialogue with the Russians. Watch.
I think we need to take a step back and ask ourselves, is it good to have conversation with your adversaries? Is it good to have open lines of communications with Russia? You know, in the worst part of the Cold War, probably during the Cuban Missile Crisis, Kennedy had a direct line to Khrushchev. We had an ambassador in Russia. We had an ambassador in Russia even during the years of Stalin. So I think having open lines of communication is very important for avoiding war. And I think that's what I would see this meeting as, is renewing engagement and renewing open lines of conversation.
So did the president make the U.S. look like a big pushover, as someone suggests, or is there a bigger point that we're all missing? Joining me now, California Republican Congressman Dana Rohrabacher. Welcome back to the show, Congressman.
Howdy.
So a lot of your colleagues on Capitol Hill from your own party, they are condemning the president. What do you think about some of the reaction to the Helsinki summit?
Well, what we've got here are people who are just buying on to whatever is said that's negative about Russia. We have had an unrelenting hostility by a group of very powerful interest groups in our country and in our government, unrelenting hostility, pushing us towards more conflict, pushing against any attempt to try to have communication or finding anything mutually beneficial that we could do. This is wrong, and the president is absolutely right in trying to find out if we can open a dialogue, cut this hostility. It could bring us to war if we don't watch out, and find ways. Is there mutual benefit? Some way we can do that? Yeah. Even Putin said so today. We should work together to defeat radical Islam and nuclear proliferation. There's lots of things like that, or there's a number of things we can start off with. But that's not going to satisfy these people who want basically us to be in a hostile situation with Russia today, which I could say could eventually lead to war. And that would be tragic.
I understand that. And there is something very valuable in opening up a dialogue and in opening up markets and economies. That is completely valid. But there is a difference between being completely hostile and heading toward war and being so soft it borders on appeasement. And when the president, okay, hold on one second. When the president talks about the United States intelligence agencies being less trustworthy than Vladimir Putin, that's where I have a problem. And I think it's okay to be skeptical every once in a while. I think every leader, especially leaders in the United States, deserve skepticism and rational pushback. And I think you're seeing that today from a lot of people who have respect for and agree with the president and vote with him most of the time. But here they're saying that some of his comments require, if nothing else, some clarification.
Well, I disagree with your analysis. The bottom line is the president understands, and I understand, that by being critical of some of the maneuvers and moves by a very powerful clique within our law enforcement, with the FBI and CIA, you've got a very powerful clique that has politicized themselves, and they have made it, they call it deep state. Well, it exists. No, there's no further evidence necessary than to say right before the president's going to meet with the president of Russia, they have this indictment which is going to cause great harm to any open dialogue between the presidents. I don't disagree with you about
the timing. I thought the timing of that was very curious. And I think
that's why we shouldn't trust these guys.
I think that boils down to Rod Rosenstein and Robert Mueller. I think, they were working in concert with each other to change the president's agenda in Russia and make sure that this is on the front page. Having said that, I do think, hold on one second, I want you to respond to this specific point. I think there's a difference between Dan Coats and Christopher Wray and Mike Pompeo. You would certainly agree that they are vastly different than John Brennan and James Comey and James Clapper.
That's right, but they also rely on some of the same embedded leftists that have been embedded by those very people that you said that there's a difference between.
Yes.
Yeah, they had their people that they have burrowed into the system. And for example, we have, did the intelligence services really say that the Russians came in and that this was the hacking, that there was collusion?
No, but there's a difference.
Putin
but there's certainly
and our president.
There's certainly a difference. But there's a
at.
huge, important difference between Russians screwing around, sowing chaos, and those working on the Trump campaign and the president himself colluding with them. There is a huge difference there, and the president not only has to realize that, the president has to make that plain. That yes, Russians were meddling, they were screwing around. No, I don't believe that the president
I think the president made it
colluding.
very clear. Made it very clear. The bottom line is that we do some of these things ourselves. Yeah. He had mentioned that. The bottom line is, when we're talking about meddling in other people's elections, yeah, the Russians did that. That's wrong.
Yes.
It's wrong when we do it. The fact is, we do 10 times more meddling throughout the world in other people's elections than the Russians do. It's time to back away from that. That's what the president said. Neither of us should be doing that. But if we don't recognize that we're engaged in that, look, we ended up overthrowing the government of Ukraine 2 years before there was going to be a free election in which Yanukovych would have gotten his butt kicked out, but we couldn't wait. We were involved with the oligarchs down there, and that led to all of this Russian military activity in that area.
Speaking of that region, Georgia and Ukraine, I'm going to be talking with the former president of Georgia after Chris Wallace's interview. Thank you so much, Congressman Rohrabacher.